up, everybody? Corey Hughes Bloody History. We're back. So I hope that everybody enjoyed the wrap-up of the 8 plus 2 equals 10 series. I did. I think it's the best explanation of what happened with the grassy knoll and Valente as I could have possibly given. If you haven't seen that stuff, go to Rockfin and watch the video. It's better than the audio on this one for sure. But what we're going to do today is we're going to continue on with these long-lost interviews of Loran Hall that were conducted by Jim Garrison and his investigator, Stephen Jaffe. So this one here is short. It's from 1968, March 20th of 1968. On March 12th, 68 at 7:30 p.m., I met Loran Eugene Hall at his motel. He was registered at the Hollywood Hills Motel 7140, Sunset Boulevard, room number 7. We met there and subsequently went to Tana's restaurant, where we discussed the following information and reviewed the FBI reports regarding himself, the Sylvia Odio incident, William Seymour, and Lawrence Howard. Hall stated that the FBI report dated 9/23/64 was inaccurate in its mention of one Kiki Ferrer as being the person he got in touch with. He stated that he was in touch with a Cuban named Herrera. So the story changes again. Herrera, according to Hall, had been in the anti-Castro group designated the 2506 Brigade, and that his father owned a sugar plantation near Mexicali, Mexico. Hall stated that it was Herrera, not Ferrer, who was employed by the Texas Optical Company in Dallas. So if you've been following the Loran Hall's story over the past, we did a bunch of episodes on him. He's totally full of shit. I mean, he's changed this story a bunch of times, right? And now he's adding another twist to it, that he was looking for Herrera, not Ferrer. Hall stated that he knew he had never seen any Sylvia Odio because he has seen a photograph of her with her 4 children shown to him by Jerry Cohen of the Los Angeles Times and Lawrence Schiller of either Life magazine, the Los Angeles Times, or who knows what. He stated that he could not recall if it was Cohen or Schiller because both men had visited him and shown him photographs. Hall stated that during his interrogation by S.A. Leon F. Brown, he had been asked if he had met Sylvia Odio in Dallas. He said that it was possible, but that he had no recollection of that. The agent then asked him if he could have been at Magellan Circle, apartment A, and Hall repeated that it was possible because he had visited people trying to secure funds for his anti-Castro activities. He made it clear to me that he could not rule out the possibility, and for that reason he told the agent Brown that it was possible. The report dated 9/23/64 is incorrect when it says Hall stated that this Cuban woman lived because at no time did he indicate that as a fact. The FBI report says Hall said that a Dallas resident had made available $5,000, which Hall put up for bail, and that they were released. Hall stated that he knew nothing of the bail at the time of their release. He was under the assumption that the charges had been dropped at the time of their release. After their release, they were taken to a young attorney's office in Dallas. Hall had never seen this man before and does not remember his name. The attorney said that they should go straight to the YMCA where Lester Logue had arranged a room for them. Consider this in the light of their having been signed in as Hall and Howard. Hall stated that he knows Kiki Ferrer well and has had dinner at his home twice in Miami, Florida, and that Kiki will have no part in his brother Rolando's activities. If you recall, we covered a lot of this Kiki and Rolando Ferrer's activities down in Miami when we covered the Lawrence Howard interview. Kiki is a dentist, Hall says, and is not interested in participating in the anti-Castro activities, although he is in sympathy with the activities. Kiki helped indirectly, but never was in direct contact with the activities. Hall said that while the report indicates that he mentioned the Isle of Pines, neither he nor Agent Brown ever mentioned the Isle of Pines during the entire interrogation. Hall also told me that until our meeting, he had never seen these documents. Hall stated that in the document, which quotes him as having recalled that, quote, the 3 of them, Hall, Howard, and Seymour, had gone to the apartment of a Cuban woman, quote, is totally inaccurate, as the 3 of them were never in Dallas together. Hall had been there with Howard at a separate time, and he was there with Seymour, but never with the both of them at the same time. See page 3, 92364, dictated 91764. Hall continued that where the report says that they had, quote, been in Dallas about 3 or 4 days when he and Seymour were arrested and held by police, end quote, that is false. Not only were the three of them not there at the same time, but that the arrest of himself and Seymour took place on the morning after the evening they had arrived. They had arrived about 8 p.m. and were arrested about 9 a.m. the next morning, having talked to no one in the interim. Hall stated in regard to his willingness to go to New Orleans to talk to District Attorney Jim Garrison, this was now perfectly agreeable to him. He would wait until he had got some of his strength back. He was discharged at the end of February 1968 from the Veterans Administration Hospital in Los Angeles on Sawtell Avenue, and until he had a doctor's clearance. He further stated that he trusted me and would agree to any arrangement we would make for his trip. He said that he wanted to testify under oath and that he would cooperate in any way possible. When I asked why this had seemed to be contrary to his attitude before, he said for 2 reasons. He had fought his extradition as a material witness. First, he was visited the night before his California hearing by Lawrence Schiller, Jerry Cohen, and one other man, and they said to him that he would be charged for contempt of court or perjury and thrown in jail for 5 years if he went to New Orleans. They told him that Garrison is some kind of a nut and urged that he not go to New Orleans under any circumstances. Secondly, since his hearing, he had to pay $1,500 in attorney's fees and had been suddenly stricken with a serious ailment. This, he feared, might have been caused by one of Garrison's men or by someone who did not want him to testify in New Orleans. I asked Hall why his wife had such puzzlingly negative reaction to the letter sent to him by Jim Garrison. This was the letter hand-carried to his home and to his wife by Jack Houston. He told me that he had nothing but contempt for Corky, because he was told by his wife that Corky had scared her with the letter. Corky is the nickname for Jack Houston, if you'll recall, as we learned in the communications between Corky and Harold Weisberg. Houston had apparently presented it to her as if he was a Garrison staff member. When she questioned this, Houston phoned the office in New Orleans and spoke to Assistant D.A. James Alcock, which Mrs. Hall took to be an affirmation of Houston's word of being a staff member. This frightened her further because she felt that Houston had been spying on them all along and was trying to get Hall in trouble. Hall confirmed that at the time of the letter's transport he was in the hospital, but that now he had read it and its contents supported the truth that Garrison was willing to cooperate with him. He felt that now, having read the letter, having talked with Harold Weisberg, Bill Turner, Al Schwartz, Citizens Committee of Inquiry, and myself, that he had nothing to fear in traveling to New Orleans. He not only looks forward to doing it, but he said that since reading the Turner article in Ramparts, he can now fill in some of the important information and identities of subjects Garrison is interested in. I showed Hall a photo of the second man in the, quote, walking men photograph. He could not identify this man. Later, I asked him if he had ever heard the name Clinton Hampton. Hall said yes immediately and gave me the following information. Description: 40 years old in 1963, 5'5" or 5'6" tall, dark complexion. Association: Hall had met him in Miami. Said Hampton was an instructor and was possibly CIA. Hall told me Hampton. Hall had told me Hampton 2 times after having been referred by 2 Cuban women, lesbians, according to Hall, in a well-known bar which he frequented. Did not give the name of the bar. Hampton told Hall at the time of their meeting that he might get him in on, quote, green light raid running boats for the CIA. I asked Hall whether or not he was working for Edgar Eugene Bradley, soliciting funds from Wallace for President campaign centers. I told him that the office had an anonymous call to this effect and that it had seemed impossible at the time, but that we wanted to have his reaction. He said he would be the last one in the world to do a thing like that at this point because he wants to be as far away from Bradley as he possibly can. He wants no part of Bradley and states that he believes it's very possible that Bradley might be involved in some way in the assassination. This is purely speculation on his part, other than his knowledge of Bradley's acquaintances during the early part of 1963. Hall stated he was definitely present at a meeting at Clinton Wheat's Los Angeles apartment on Lafayette Place in 1963, where others present were Edgar Eugene Bradley, Ed Collins, Colonel Gale, Dr. Stanley Drennan. Remember, it is my personal belief that it's Ed Collins out on the street with Oswald in the video where he's handing out the flyers. So keep that in mind. He said that he would definitely state this under oath. I asked Hall if he had reason to believe that there was anyone who might want to get him in trouble. He said there could be many possibilities for that. At a point later in our conversation, I asked Hall how he got along with Jerry Patrick Hemming. He said that for the most part, he'd always gotten along well with Patrick. He considered him a hell of a nice guy and thought that Patrick was his friend. When I asked him if he thought Patrick might be the one who gave the tip about him being a solicitor for the Bradley Defense Fund, Hall said that only one thing would make him believe that to be a possibility. Any incident occurred in 1963 which involved himself and Patrick. Patrick has sold, or rather hawked, a rifle with Dick Hathcock, an ABC TV reporter in Los Angeles. Dick Hathcock has recently done television interviews with Roger Craig and I believe with DA Jim Garrison. The rifle remained in Hathcock's possession until a conversation between Hall and Hathcock brought out that Hathcock was going to sell the rifle to anyone he could. Hall told him that he would like to buy it from him if he didn't have to keep it for Patrick. Soon after, Hall purchased the rifle from Hathcock for a sum of $50. Thereafter, when Hall was in Florida, Patrick phoned him and threatened him if he did not hand over the rifle. Hall rejected the threat. A few days later, when Hall went to a specific local or the beach to acquire a boat for a forthcoming raid, he was accompanied by a Cuban friend of his. While they were attaching the boat to the trailer, the Cuban said, "Look up in that house. It's Patrick." Hall looked but didn't see anyone. That evening, Hall and his friend were arrested by U.S. Customs officials. At that time, the customs officials told Hall that they had known about his activities from the time he picked up the boat. Someone they boasted had called them at 2:30 p.m. Hall said that this was just about the time they got the boat. At the conclusion of our meeting, Hall told me that we would be in touch upon his next trip to Los Angeles and that he would help in any way he could if there was anything he could do. I told him I would arrange his trip whenever he was ready. So that was the interview with Stephen Jaffe and Loran Hall, Stephen Jaffe being an investigator for Jim Garrison. Now we're going to hop over to the next interview with Loran Hall. It appears to have been conducted by, or at least the following people were present. This took place May 6, 1968 in New Orleans. This is Jim Garrison, James Alcock, Andrew Sciambra, Tom Bethel, and Louis Ivan. So it seems as though it picks up mid conversation. It's hard to tell though. This is notated as the second page is page number 2, and it's a continuation of this first page, which must be page number 1. But again, it does appear to pick up mid conversation. So it begins with Loran Hall saying the following. I had hepatitis, and I showed him my arm and everything, and he says, "You've got hepatitis," and then I went in. In fact, I wasn't even going to go to court the next day, and my attorney, "You little turd, you're going." So I would end up going to court the next day for the final hearing, and then that next morning I was in the vet's hospital. The question is, unknown if it's from Jim. I think it's from Jim Garrison. Did the doctor conclude about the cause of the hepatitis? Did he speculate? Jim, yeah, he did. You see, if you've got infectious hepatitis, they put screens around you and all this stuff, and they put you in a restricted ward. But with me, they didn't. The only thing they kept telling me was, "How long have you been an addict?" And I said, "What?" And they said, "Well, how long have you been an addict?" And I said, "Why is that?" And I said, "Why is that?" And they said, "Because you've got Syrian hepatitis." And I said, "So what?" And they said, you get it from a needle or something." Yeah. He then started talking, and he said, "You are an addict?" And I said, "Hell no, I'm not an addict." And he said, "Have you had any blood transfusions in the last 6 months?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And he says, "Well, have you had any shots or anything like that?" And I said, "My doctor gave me a shot for a cold that I had 3 or 4 months ago." And he said that that wouldn't have been it. And he said, "It sure looks to me like you've been hit with a needle." So then when it starts dawning on me what he's trying to tell me, about 4 or 5 weeks later, I asked him for a letter, and I don't want to be involved. So I said, "Fine, what the hell? You can't push those people." We've already asked you about Ted Slack and John Bloomer. You don't know these people, right? I don't think so. I haven't seen pictures of them or anything. All right, so let me touch real quick upon Ted Slack and John Bloomer. So Garrison is asking about these guys in reference to the possibility that they might have been two of the three tramps. Okay? Of course, he's fucking wrong, right? But I dug deep into these motherfuckers, okay? And Ted Slack was definitely like a very right-wing kind of guy. I could never pin down if he was a Cuban. I mean, he was an American citizen, but he was dark-skinned, dark-complected. I believe possible suspect is the short tramp. And so I spent a lot of time on Ted fucking Slack pulling up stuff that he was involved with, and there is a decent amount of information out there on Ted Slack. Most of it you're not going to find in any of these documents. You're going to find it in newspapers.com. That's where you're going to find everything about Ted Slack. If you go and do searches of Ted Slack in 1960s in the Southeast, you'll find a whole bunch of stuff about Ted Slack and his involvement with right-wing groups. But I never found any overt connection to these guys with Ted Slack at all. And John Bloomer was suspected of being the tall tramp. And I believe it was Jerry Hemming who gave him these fucking names. And Jerry Hemming, like, the guy's... You can't believe anything he ever said to fucking Garrison. Because he knew exactly what happened. He had to have known exactly what happened, especially when he went digging into the rifle, the Johnson 30-06 that Loran Hall had used in the assassination. Once he realized that thing was in play, and he got fucking freaked out because he didn't want it to be. He knew it was Jerry Hemming's rifle, but Loran Hall had used it in the assassination, right? So that's as close as I can connect Jerry Hemming to the assassination. So when Hemming says he was in Miami, I don't know. He might have been. I don't buy that he was in Dallas simply because of his overt, well-documented reaction to the assassination afterwards. So, yeah, I think the assassination happened. Jerry Hemming got scared as fuck. And then when he realized that the rifle was picked up by Loran Hall, then his, like, I think he had the pucker factor went way through the fucking roof. It's kind of hilarious, right? But that's why I don't think that he was involved. I really don't. I don't think he was involved directly in the assassination planning. I think they probably looked at him and he figured he had too much going on elsewhere. He might have been tied to too many things, and maybe he wasn't disposable, right? Maybe he wasn't disposable. Not that Valenti was disposable. Look to the great lengths they went to protect Valenti, right? Starting at the split second after the assassination, he got driven away in the Secret Service car. That's the level they went to protect him. But nobody else. David Ferry got fucked. You know, Lawrence Howard and these guys, that nothing ever happened with these guys, but they never got any big success or anything in life, and they turned out to be a bunch of fucking nobodies. Still dying to find some William Seymour interviews. I haven't found anything, and I've been tedious about going through Weisberg's files, but it's, Jesus Christ, it's like a fucking maze. It is genuinely like a fucking labyrinth. You know, you click one fucking thing and it's got only one little folder in it, and you open that folder, and that folder's got 50 folders in it, and each folder has like goddamn, you know, a varying amount of new PDFs, and you're like, oh my god, I never would have checked this. So it's like I'm drowning in Weisberg's archive. But all right, so let me get back to this. So yeah, Ted Slack and John Bloomer are guys who were associated with the Minutemen and these right-wing organizations. They're definitely not the tramps, but I understand why they got thrown into the mix, because Jerry Hemming was misleading Garrison every time he fucking talked to him. And Loran Hall says, I don't think that I do. I haven't seen pictures of them or anything. And then Garrison says, the names don't sound familiar. And he says, the only one that could possibly sound familiar is Bloomer. And he says, it's from St. Louis. Well, I wouldn't have met him in St. Louis. I would have met him in Kansas City in 59. Yeah, I would have met him in 59. And I can't read that last sentence. And it says, something is the one that I'm thinking about. He would have been working in a hotel in Kansas City as a night clerk, and he was involved with Lacaya Forfan and Chester Lacaya, Lacaya. These were two Nicaraguans that were planning the invasion of Nicaragua in either late 59 and 60, and they pulled the thing off, and they got wiped out at the pass. Oh, interesting. So remember that Hall ended up in Castro's prison Triscornia with Traficante. And this all involves like McWillie coming down and visiting Giuseppe de George, who I'm of the belief was Jack Valente. And this is around that time, 59, 60-ish. And so Hall was actually locked up because they busted him planning to do this Nicaraguan invasion thing. And so here we have another piece of the puzzle. In that Nicaraguan invasion was legit, and it was being organized by these two guys. Lacayo Forfin and Chester Lacayo. Interesting. Hemming indicates that Bloomer was a Minuteman. Would that fit into your recollection if you did meet him? No, because there was nothing mentioned about Minutemen or anything like that. Lacayo, I wonder, this is Alcock. Lacayo, I wonder if that was the man who was in prison with Bradley, the Nicaraguan who was in prison with Bradley. Just vaguely, Jim. You mean Leslie Bradley? Yes. Do you know Leslie Bradley? Speaking of him, there's another Bradley named Leslie Bradley. Was he in Cuba during the Revolution? Yeah. There's a chance that I did know him because I met him, prior to my being arrested over in Cuba. I met 5 or 6 of the Americans that were over there during the Revolution, like Farini. Oh, he's talking about Frank Sturgis. Farini, which is actually Fiorini. Like Farini, Thompson, Austin Young. I met quite a few of these guys. What time are you talking about? Hall says 58 and 59. And Garrison asked, Castro was in the hills? In 58, he was in the hills, but in 59, when I met all these guys, this was in Havana after Castro had taken over. What caused such a complete departure of all Americans? Castro had an awful lot of supporting him at first, and then it reached the point where they were all gone. You mean the ones that were there in the mountains with him and so forth? Yeah. Well, I think you'll find that in about February, he told, first of all, the American ambassador, Bonzel, put the word out that all you clowns better get out of the country because if you become an officer's rank, you'll lose your American citizenship. And so there was probably a third of them left over that. And then Castro came out with, well, we don't, something, you 3 or you 4 in the army, how about, and I can't read the next part, it's cut off, something, and getting your college education and all that stuff. So those few left the country. And then there was, I'll say, April, when I was arrested, there probably wasn't over 8 or 9 of us left even there that was in the service. Castro kind of something against turned against his American supporters. Oh yeah, you could tell right off from the beginning. The only American that really had anything going was William Morgan. He's the only one. All right. Let me pause. I have to pause for a minute and take this in. So William Morgan is a name that comes up a lot. Connected to Clay Shaw, connected to Jack Valenti, connected to David Ferry, connected to all the oil guys. Unless there's a different William Morgan. There are a bunch of Morgans that pop up for sure in this realm. But William Morgan, this is a significant name that I'm going to have to delve into. Let's pull everything on William Morgan, and let's make sure it's the right William Morgan. And then Garrison asks, he ended something, didn't he? And Loran Hall says, yeah. I don't know what he asked there. And then Garrison asks, do you suppose a part of that was the fact that the CIA was something to some degree, and he probably decided there was no way to tell at all because everyone, something, take Hemming assigned out there, which was something at the time. Sorry, I can't read this. And he goes, well, Hemming... Now, this is Hemming's story. Hemming was with William Morgan. Hemming told me that he had something like chosen or had been with William Morgan, and I can never recall having seen Hemming all of the time that I was in Havana. I can never remember ever seeing him. Then Garrison asks, he speaks of William Morgan in one of his letters. And then Hall says, he told me he was serving with William Morgan, and this is quite possible that he was CIA. I don't know. And the only thing I know is that William Morgan was either a double agent for Castro. By that I mean he had this Trujillo sent that bunch in from Santo Domingo to invade Cuba, and like when they landed, they were all, I can't read that, GAR something OED, they were all something out real quick because the Fidelis something were there waiting so Fidel's men were there waiting for them, and William Morgan came out smelling like a rose on that thing because someone said he had set the whole thing up, and because and became the hero of it. But when they found out that somehow or some way that they found out that William Morgan really wanted this invasion from Trujillo to have taken place, he really wanted it to be successful. When something Fidel had known about it, and he capped the whole thing out to Fidel. So who in the hell and entangled the damn thing. All right, so let me just try and recap what I can. So he's talking about Trujillo, which is like the Dominican Republic, right? Talking about setting up a place from which on the island from which they could do a raid into Cuba. And I guess they get busted, and William Morgan was behind the whole thing. But at the end of the day, William Morgan comes out smelling like roses on top of the whole thing. He never gets in trouble for anything. This makes sense to me if you come to the fucking realization that Castro was working with the CIA the whole fucking time. After the Bay of Pigs, it's my opinion that the CIA realized that they couldn't take him out. They needed him for many reasons. They needed him to be the permanent bad guy to funnel money for every fucking goddamn black op they wanted to do, right? He was the need. He was the boogeyman at the doorstep, right? So they needed that. Plus, I'm convinced he was still involved in the CIA's active trafficking activities post-Bay of Pigs. So they had to have come to some sort of arrangement with him. So yes, I believe that fucking Castro ultimately was a CIA agent the whole fucking time he was in power. And that's why he stayed in power, because that's the arrangement. That was the deal. You think we couldn't knock off the fucking 2-bit dictator 90 miles off the coast? Go fuck yourself, please. So that's what he's talking about here. All right, continuing on. Garrison asks, somewhere along the line, something seems to have become a different person. Who's he talking about? Is he talking about Morgan? Castro seems to have become a different person than he was before. Something changed, didn't it? And then Hall says, I won't say that. This is what I said in the beginning, and this is what I thought in 59, that it looked to me like something have swung either way, but he could have swung either way. But when you check his background, Jim, you found out that in 1943 he was with a communist delegation to Cuba to the Bogota-Colombia deal. This is where they were going to smear the president of the United States and get rid of the OAS, the Organization of American... can't read that. Organization of American something. Not the OAS, the Organisation Armée Secrète, which is the French organization. That's something else. It's a different OAS. The Organization of American States, I can't say, it's American something. And you find that something assassinated several that he assassinated several people when he was going to, and fuck, that page goddamn completely cuts off. The next page, we just lost the whole page, okay? Oh, maybe not. Maybe this does connect. So it seems to connect. And you find that he assassinated several people when he was going to, and then when he was going to college. There was a police record on him there at the police station. No, this has to be, we lost the whole page here. Sorry, guys. You find that he assassinated several people when he was going to blank. And then picks up on the next page. It says college. There was a police record on him there at the police station that wouldn't stop, of course. It's been destroyed now. He had been a radical bastard all the time, so I'm not going to say that he was not a radical communist prior to 59 because I don't know. And Garrison asks him, let me ask you this little point here. Have you ever bumped into Richard Lochley? He was one of the top Minutemen until he split from Depew. Hall says he's from California. He says, no, he's from Missouri. He was training north of Lake Pontchartrain in one of the CIA camps. So here we have a reference again to the CIA camps north of Lake Pontchartrain. But remember, we got Jerry Hemming saying that they never actually got set up. They went and scoped it out and never set it up. Then there's information that one of these guys had a house with a big piece of land up on the property there north of Lake Pontchartrain and was going to set it up there. But this is all speculation. Like, we don't really have any factual information on the raids of Lake Pontchartrain. Maybe we can dig into newspapers.com and look for some of the news publications of 1962 or 3 or whenever this was supposed to have fucking happened and find it there. And then Hall says, no, I didn't know him. And then Garrison asks, did you ever hear of a fellow named F. Lee Chrisman? Travels a lot in Tacoma, all over the country. Hall says no. Here's the name of the guy that Wheat's living with now. His name is Al Hunt, publisher of the National Chronicle. He lives in Bernie, California, wherever the hell that is. Hall says that's clear up north. You don't know who that is? Hall says there was a Hunt that worked at the Poor Richard bookstore in downtown Hollywood. And I would say he was probably 28 or 29 in 1963. This is possible. It could be the same one. He was also a Minuteman, and oh hell, he was a member of a lot of different organizations. Let me pause right here. This Poor Richard bookstore in downtown Hollywood. This has popped up for me a couple times now, so we might want to look into everything related to the Poor Richard bookstore. It might have been a front at the time, actually. Now that I think about it. This is possible. It could be the same one. He was also a Minuteman, and oh hell, he was a member of a lot of different organizations. He worked for Reunetzie, Renutzie, had the bookstore here on Hollywood, and these are like, it's the Reunetzie New Bradley. It's like Hunt worked for Renutzie. I don't know how to fucking say this. Renutzie, Renutzie. That's how I'll pronounce it. And I would give a talk at Renutzie's place. And heck, I would see a lot of the same faces I had seen at Wheat's house there at Renutzie's store. And so they all run in a circle. And yet maybe you never see these two together, but you'll see this guy's best friend over here. And this is what I found when I was giving my talks. Just like Bradley now says, yes, I was at Wheat's house for 2 speeches. I don't remember Hall, but I was there for 2. I heard one guy speak, and then I gave a talk. But Christ, when he gives his talks, there were people from 5 or 6 organizations that came to listen. Well, it's like you're seeing Kerry Thornley at a separate speech in Whittier, and you don't see him connected directly with those guys. Yet when something happens, he turns up to be part of it in another part of the country. It's like I cannot say that I cannot definitely, absolutely remember Thornley. But it seems to me like when I seen that one picture of that guy in Whittier at one of the talks that I gave. Oh, so we might have seen Thornley at a talk in Whittier, California, Whittier, California is exactly where, oh my God, where he went in fucking May of 1963. Okay, so we're going to have to recap real quickly. Kerry Thornley, and I'm going to limit this because I'm going to go off on a fucking tangent. So Kerry Thornley, May of 1963 through September of 1963, we have a void, a black hole in the life of Kerry Thornley. So he allegedly heads to Whittier, California in May of 1963, where he has this void between then and September 4th when he reappears down in New Orleans, right? But in between there, on his way to Whittier, he goes through Mexico City, right? And then on his way back to New Orleans in September, he goes back through Mexico City, right? But the whole time he was allegedly in Whittier, California. Then I think he went down and spent a little time in Los Angeles, but he was working at a cafe out there in Whittier, right? So when Loran Hall sees his picture and says he seems like a guy I might have seen in Whittier, guess what I can fucking deduct from everything that we just fucking talked about? That goddamn Kerry Thornley was probably at one of his fucking meetings at Whittier, California. And when would this have taken place? When was Kerry Thornley actively involved in this kind of stuff, right? It wasn't in high school. It wasn't in the Marines. It was after he went to New Orleans and got involved with all these fucking guys, right? And so we can narrow down the time frame here of when Loran Hall hooked up with Kerry Thornley, and that would have been in between May and September of 1963. Okay, so when was Hall? He couldn't have done it in later of September of 63. Could he have done it in August of 63? I think it's less likely. I think we have holes in Loran Hall's timeline enough so that we can probably say this was either in May or June of 1963, possibly July. I would narrow it down to those 3 months because after that, Hall is on his way back into the circuit, right? So Garrison asked, did we suggest Whittier before that conclusion reached your mind? He says, I don't know this. I asked Billings. He showed me a picture of him, and I said, God damn, he looks familiar. And I said, had he ever been to California? He says, yeah. And I said, from where? And he said, Whittier. I said, oh man, Christ, this has really got my start giving talks from some friends of mine out there in the Whittier area. And he says, oh man, don't tell Garrison, don't even mention it to Garrison, that there's a possibility that you knew Thornley. Okay, well, if he's mentioning there's a possibility he knew Thornley, of course he knew Thornley, right? And where else does he probably know Thornley from? Well, Loran Hall was probably at the fucking party in September, late September, when Thornley was there, as described by Perry Russo. Because some of the Cubans were there, right? And a couple other people were there. I'm pretty sure that there's no reason why Loran Hall and these guys wouldn't have been there. So it's possible he knew Kerry Thornley from there. I don't really have a timeline on when Lawrence Howard was interacting with David Ferry at G. Ray Gill's office. I'd have to look at those dates again. I think that he started that job in 61 or 62. So this is a wide range of times that this could have occurred, and that when David Ferry was interacting with these three guys specifically in New Orleans. And I still need to narrow down William Seymour's time in New Orleans when he was considered to be the local representative of the Double Check Corporation, which is a weird reference on WikiSpooks. Garrison says, when he says that, is he kidding or what? Hall says, no, he's dead serious. What do you suppose his angle is not to tell us? Is it some interest that? I don't know. This is exactly what I'm saying. I talked to one guy, for example, Schiller, Cohen, and somebody by the name of Jones came to my attorney's office the night before my first hearing on January 10th. And like Schiller says, he calls my attorney and says, I think I got some information that might be of help to Hall, but in return, I want him to help us. And then we have a meeting. So my attorney calls me and says, I think it might be beneficial for us to do this. And I said, fine. So we got there and Schiller did all of this talking. And he started in there, and he says, there's one thing that I know that Garrison wants to know. Have you ever been to New York? And I said, yes, I was. And he says, when was this? And I said, I think it was either March or April. And he says, boy, you're in trouble because this fits right along with when Garrison was thinking about. And he says, for your own good, you better fight this all you can because this really might put you in some trouble. And I said, look, he wanted to know then why I went to New York. So I told him. So I told him what the deal was on New York and that I went there to see Cantabi, Cantabi. That's the Haitian on this Haitian invasion thing. He said that when you were out there, did you meet Masferer? And I said, hell no, I didn't meet Masferer. And he says, did you know Masferer? And I said, I knew Kiki there in Miami, but I only met him once. And he said, boy, you got problems. And I tell you, I was so goddamn scared because I started reading the reports, like the FBI report that said I said this, and then I started finding out all this other crap, and I couldn't find witnesses then. I found the witness, but they would say, I can't be in court today because I'm working. Or like, Jesus, Skip, I remember seeing you, but I don't remember what day it was. I was really running scared because everybody said, man, he's a maniac, referring to you. And I'm going around here like this. And then Garrison says, Schiller's a lovely guy. He's been a real help in this whole thing. Let me ask you about this Wheat. Have you thought of any other characters that hung around Wheat's house since we last talked last night? Well, it was, Jim, you're going to find that my memory of names is not that good. If you can't remember the name, you can describe them. Right, there was one alcoholic that spent a lot of time there at Wheat's house. He was a friend of Wheat's. He had just gotten out of the drunk tank, I think, at the county jail. And he went to work there, you see. He started staying there at Wheat's house when Dr. Drennan wanted to build the bunker, the cement bunker at his house. This drunk and Wheat went out and built the cement bunker. Does he have one there now? No, he moved from that last house. He now lives, I think, in Lake Hollywood. Steve Burton's got his address and telephone number and everything. So just for documentary purposes, the connection to Dr. Drennan between from Loran Hall is Steve Burton. So it's Loran Hall, Steve Burton, Dr. Drennan, and Dr. Drennan connects to G. Clinton Wheat. And that whole circle of right-wing fanatics. And a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on these fucking guys like Dr. Drennan, and are like, oh, this guy was involved in all this. Look, all these fucking guys were part of the right-wing network that our known assassins kind of hopped in and out of, right? That's it. No further digging needs to be done there. Genuinely. I've done it. It doesn't go anywhere. All it leads to are these right-wing networks and all kinds of other shit that has nothing to do with the assassination. So, there you go. Anyway, you have the alcoholic. Yeah. What does he look like? As I recall, he'd probably be about 53 or 54 in 1964, and he was a typical-looking alcoholic, you know? Puffy? Yeah, puffy, and yet he was, probably he stood around 5'9", probably weighed 150, and I think he had a good education at one time or another, because when he was sober and he wasn't shaking, he sounded pretty, Then Jim Garrison says, Lou, that almost sounds like the number 3 man in the photograph. Don't we have one in which you can almost see him, which he could show him for comparison purposes in the walking picture? You know, where he's almost in view. He's he's a real alcoholic bum. He's listed that way. You have the first 2, and then you have the third man that's usually hidden. You can't see, but his face partially comes to view in one of them. So he's still talking about the tramps, and he's way off base here, because the old tramp is Leo Mosseri out of Cleveland. not Los Angeles. And he says, Loran Hall says, but John Lorenz, Lorenz, and his 2 buddies, they spent a lot of time there. Would you say Lorenz is a German? I don't know what the hell he would be. I really don't. Is he NSRP? I would say definitely so. I would say that practically everybody there at that house was NSRP. I'm thinking that's Nazi, National Socialists, something, or a National Republican Party, or I don't know what the fuck that means. And then Garrison says, Drennan is known to be. Hall says, well, Gale was too. That simplifies a lot of things. I knew Gale was way out, but I didn't classify him as NSRP. Oh, Christ, Gale. In fact, Gale had the Signal Hill American Legion Club. They lost their national franchise because of Gale. Yeah, but I mean, it isn't just a case of his being radical. He's NSRP. No, he's NSRP is National States Rights Party. Good. In fact, on his ticket when he was running, this was what his big thing was, running on national states' rights. And I don't know about Bradley, like I say. I only met him that one time. What does Gale do now? And Hall says, I don't know. I have no idea. I heard that he was down around, I think, around La Jolla, which is around close to San Diego. I mean, has he calmed down any? No, he's still real active. Did Gale ever show up at Wheat's house? Oh, yeah. He was there the night that Bradley was there. In fact, it was Gale and Bradley that were standing together in back of the room when I gave my talk. Do you remember roughly when that was? I would say September of 1963. It would have either had to have been August or September of 1963. And would have had to have been on one of those 2 dates. And I'm almost positive it was September. No, it wasn't September. It couldn't have been September. Because if he's talking about the trip that he made out there shortly after Whittier, Whittier could not have been in September because Kerry Thornley was back by September 4th. Therefore, it had to have been in August. Well, I guess the trip to Wheat's house could have been in September. Was that shortly after the Whittier talk? No, this was a month or 2 later. The Whittier talk probably would have been around August of 63. Okay, there we go. Yep, July or August. There we go. Totally makes sense. I'm not trying to pin you down. It would have been July or August. That's when Thornley was back in California. Who else was there at the Wheat House that you can recall? Well, like there was two old ladies, and I know that one of them had been an editor or something for a paper, and there was, I want to say that the Idlettes, they were there, but I'm not certain. As I recall, the Idlettes was there because it really surprised me. That's Aydelottes. And they showed up because they had already heard my talk about at some place out there in the San Fernando Valley. There was, I think, that there was a man there who gave a talk on Spain, on the Spanish Revolution. I think he was there. I could find his name real easy. My wife was there. Garrison asked, what did he have to say? Really, it was nothing. It was like when I gave my talk, the first thing they started doing was hitting me with this questions, like they were hitting me with like, aren't you fighting the paper tiger? And I said, what do you mean by that? Well, who really is our enemies? I'd say the communists. Well, who are the communists? And I'd say, what are you trying to say? Well, isn't the Jews behind this thing, and shouldn't they be exterminated? And this was the route they were going with me, and I'd start changing questions to different people because I didn't want to get involved in the goddamn thing. So when the meeting was over, Wheat took me back and introduced me to Bradley and Gail. And Bradley was, as I recall, he was like, I'm the big deal, so just shake my hand and get the pleasure of shaking my hand, but don't get too close to me. And it seemed like Gail was like, don't touch me or say anything to me, because Gail here will take care of you. You know, it was that kind of an attitude. And he started talking. He says, your talk was very interesting. Would you like to meet Reverend McIntyre? And I said, yes, I would. And he said, maybe I can set up a date. And I told him then I don't think it would be possible because I'll be leaving town before long. And he started talking about my contacts that I had in Dallas, Texas. And as I could recall, I told him Lester Logue and Hunt, Dan Smoot. Let's pull everything on Dan Smoot. We don't know this guy yet. And General Walker and all this. And then he wanted to know who I knew in Miami. And I said, only one that I do know is Dr. Crockett. And he said, who do you know out here? And I told him, I said, what do you mean? And I told him John Russillo knows me because he sanctioned me to give the talks to the John Birch groups. And I told him that I had met Dr. Ford out at the Knott's Berry Farm. And this is all that was said, and someone walked over and said something about, do you really think that Kennedy was responsible for the Bay of Pigs failure? And I said, hell, that's a matter of record. And he said something else, and he says something ought to be done about the son of a bitch, referring to Kennedy. I don't even know who it was. I think it was a woman that got it started. Was this a smaller group after the speech? Hall says, probably 5 or 6 of us standing around. Lorenz and his 2 buddies, Gail was standing there and Bradley was standing there. And as I recall, Wheat came back and introduced us, and Wheat went back in the kitchen to get the coffee and donuts and cookies ready, and I probably didn't talk to Bradley over 4 or 5 minutes, and then him and Gail and I think Lorenz, and they all left together. One thing happened. There was a fellow, and I'm almost positive that this was the night, there was a fellow there by the name of Gene that worked at the same place that I worked for, Ted Violet. I think they call it Globe Oil Company or the Harbor Oil Company. And he was in there. And when I was over talking to some other people, he had gotten in an argument over there. And I don't know if it was with Bradley or Gail or with who, but we came in and the 2 got involved in it. And then it came into the kitchen. Then he came into the kitchen to get me because I was back there having a cup of coffee with Wheat's wife. And Wheat came in and said, get that son of a bitch out of here because he's causing trouble. So I walked in and I got Gene and who's Wheat talking about? This Gene, the one who came in there with me. And he said, get Gene out of there because he's causing trouble in there. So I walked outside and I said, what the hell's wrong, Gene? And he said, that son of a bitch in there is shooting his mouth off about you. And I said, who? And he said, the one standing in the back there. It could have been either Bradley or Gail. I don't know which one he was talking about. And he said, watch the dirty bastard because he's trying to cut you up. He got in the car and left. And that's the last time I seen Gene because I quit working out there at the oil company. He was there at the meeting. I went back inside the meeting and Gene left and Wheat said, oh man, I can't have crap like that at this meeting. And I don't want the guy back here in the house. And I said, fine. I probably stayed there another 10 or 15 minutes. Well, anyway, Gail and Bradley, and I'm most positive that Lorenz and his two buddies all left the building at the same time. Now, whether they left in the same car or not, I do not know. But I'm almost positive that they all walked out of the building at the same time. With reference to those guys you mentioned at Wheat's house, who seemed to have the most authority, any impressions about authority? It didn't give me an impression of rank. Let's put it this way. The one that looked like they respected the most, like respect, was Bradley. And then it looked like Gale. And this is where it looked at. Bradley seemed to be the equivalent to Gale. No, it seemed to me like even more so, because don't touch me, Gale will handle all this for me. So did Wheat stand in regards to them? Did he have any status? Did is purely subjective, but I'm interested. It seemed to me like, of course, I have to now go to the opinion that possibly something was going on there towards the Kennedy thing. I have to assume this now, and I would have to say that Wheat would have been something like a sergeant, you don't know nothing, but you'll run errands and you'll have the meetings here, and it seemed like they would be using Wheat. Like the officers coming to the house to lecture and then leave, I mean, this is what it looked like to me. That's the only reference to Kennedy specifically that you recall. And that meeting, yes, there's been many times, in fact, hell, they had a meeting, they had a Minuteman meeting there. Garrison asks, I mean, with that group? Hall says, yes, with that group, that was the only thing that was mentioned. Have you ever seen Colonel Gale on any other occasions? I've seen him at, I think he was there twice when I gave my talk, and I'm almost certain that Gale was at a meeting that I gave in Saugus, at an American Legion meeting down there, and this is where Fowler, the head of the Ku Klux Klan, lived, and I'm almost positive, I don't want to say for sure, but I think he was there at that meeting. Were any people in that meeting at Whittier that were at this meeting? No, none of them. The meetings that I had in Whittier, this was completely different breed of cat. They were highly militant, radical, and you mean the LA meetup? The one there at Wheat's house, anti-Semitic, anti-nigger, just anti-everything, just real strong militants. Whereas in Whittier, they were just conservatives, interested conservatives. Well, the LA meeting you just described, would you say essentially that was a NSRP group? I'd say so, yes. Don't get me wrong. I don't think I ever went to hardly ever did I have a meeting where there wasn't talk about killing Kennedy. Even with conservatives, they went so far as to be sitting there and they'd say, what we should do is get up an assassination team or 10 or 20 or 30 people that are really dedicated people who don't mind losing their life. And then we'd get the list of people who should go be assassinated and let them go do the job. This happened all over, even with what I would call non-militant conservatives. The subject always came up. I was at another house in Whittier and I was giving my talk, and this son of a bitch walks in with his fatigues on and his combat coat and a .45 strapped at his side, like he was some kind of nut, like he didn't fit into the picture because everybody else was in there in their shirt and tie and coat, and they were churchgoers and all this jazz. Garrison asks, he probably left his bunker just long enough to come to the meeting. This is true. This is exactly what he did. You're laughing, Jim, but this is the God's truth. Finished his K-rations and leave. He did. He used to live in Whittier, and his name was Thornton or something like that. And he was about 47 or 48 years old. Thornton? Thornhill? Not Thornley. It could have been. I just know that it was Thorn something. Could his last name have been Thornley? It could have been. He was 47 or 48. A heavy-set guy. Out in front, he had a Jeep, and they were telling me that they had a Jeep out in front and had moved from Whittier, and they had bought a hillside. And he built his house there, and on the side of this hill, the whole thing is nothing but one great big bunker. In fact, he told me, man, if you ever get the heat on you or anything, you need a safe house, come to my place, because they couldn't get me with a bomb. Did you ever encounter a Dr. Drennan at any other time? Oh, yes, I've been with Dr. Drennan. Oh, Christ, I've seen him 7 or 8 times at Wheat's house. Let me tell you something about Dr. Drennan. This is Garrison. Drennan, I'm sure you already know, in Drennan's case, there were in the commission exhibits, there were actually separate investigations of Dr. Drennan as early as summer of 1963. The one with regards to possible plans on his part to kill President Kennedy. One is a Secret Service investigation. Another one is the FBI investigation. On the other hand, there is none after November 22nd. It's just ignored. So we're really interested in Dr. Drennan. Suppose you tell us what you can recall about him. Well, let me just pause right here. Okay, so if you haven't noticed, all these fucking guys are totally willing to throw each other under the bus. Right? If you haven't noticed. They drop names like fucking they could care less. Okay? No honor amongst thieves. So, therefore, knowing Loran Hall was one of the shooters on the 6th floor, and that he was coordinated through David Ferry and his group in fucking New Orleans. He has no qualms whatsoever about dropping a dime on all of these motherfuckers in Los Angeles. Right? All of these right-winger dumb fucks who are probably like a bunch of inbred idiots who had nothing to do with the assassination whatsoever. He doesn't have any problem at all leading a fucking trail right to these guys. Well, there, as I recall, the first time I met him, we started talking about Kennedy, like the son of a bitch should be gotten rid of and all this. And I've talked about somebody who ought to blow his goddamn head off, or somebody who ought to put a bomb in his plane, or, I made remarks like this. But when it gets right down to the meaty, gritty part of it, I back off. It's like when Drennan started to say something I said, forget it. Like there's no way that I wanted to become involved in anything like this, because my thing is in Cuba. I don't, in fact, in the talk would tell him this is not the time to go into the mountains and start shooting and fighting. Your fight now is down here on the streets with the word of truth. And this is the message that I got across to Drennan. And like nothing like I was, like that was ever brought up again. What do you think is Dr. Drennan's attitude? Dr. Drennan's attitude was, if he could find somebody that would really do it, he'd get the money up for it. You felt that he was committed. Oh, yeah. He was so committed that he knew there was a hospital, a mental hospital in Alaska that had 1 million acres of ground. And this is where they were going to take all the conservatives and frontal something, redacted. And I mean, he was firmly convinced that this was what was going to happen to him. And it was just a matter of time before they took him to the mental hospital and did this to him. And I'm going to get that son of a bitch before he gets me. And this is the attitude that I got from Drennan. But that was the only time that he ever talked to me about anything like that. The rest of the time, he'd be in the house. He and Wheat would be over in a different part of the room talking, and I couldn't hear what was said. Or else I would see him come to the house, and I'd be out in the garage making ammunition or fixing up some weapons that I had, and I had no idea what they were talking about. What house did you see Drennan at? Wheat's house. How many times have you been to Wheat's house? I've given 3 talks there, but he had a garage out back, and this is where we made ammunition, and I went to that house 100 times, taking equipment to that garage. And you saw Drennan there how many times? Probably 7 or 8, and then I got some medical equipment off Drennan just a couple of nights before I left to come to Miami. Was that some of the equipment that caused you trouble in Dallas? Yeah, it came from Drennan. Yes. Did Drennan seem to have any authority in that group? I'll say that they respected him and they listened to what he had to say. Did he seem to have wealthy contacts? Oh yeah, Drennan did. In other words, this is subjective, but your impression, I take it, would be that he would be the money man. As far as I'm concerned, he was the only one there at the house who had money or really had sufficient contacts there to have money. Because like Gale, I never heard him talk about anything, but Drennan, you could tell that Drennan had money and could get money. Because the fact of that matter, if I'm mistaken, is I think he gave Wheat some money. They were talking about it. No, I'm almost positive that Wheat told me that he got some money off him and that he was going to have to pay Drennan back some money that he borrowed off of him. You've seen Drennan with Wheat. Who else have you seen Drennan with? Just there at the Wheat house. I mean, at the Wheat house, who did? Oh, he'd go around with everybody. He'd talk. You've seen him with Gale. Oh, yeah. In fact, Gale, I've seen him back there with Bradley. I've seen him talking with everybody. The night you talked to Bradley, when you talked when Bradley was there, Drennan was there too? Yeah. Do you know who the head of the NSRP group is out there? I have no idea whatsoever. None whatsoever. Could it be Gale? Could be, but I don't know. The commission's exhibit associated Drennan with NSRP, but Gale has a number of other titles. I think he has 3 or 4 other organizations, each one of the semi-religious. Well, Gale's, I think you'll find that they're all from that house. They're all involved in 4 or 5 different organizations, maybe just on the fringes of the organization. Like maybe they'll all attend meetings or something like this, but at least they're involved in 4 or 5 different ones. At that time, you were conscious that National States Rights Party was one of them. Yeah. Well, I shouldn't say that because they didn't say I'm in the National States Rights Party, but they all espoused of their stuff, all their propaganda. That is what they espoused upon. This is what they talked about. Do you know anyone else in LA you might not have seen in this particular group that you associate with the NSRP? There was possibly one of the fellows who was on that sheriff patrol who quite possibly fit into that. He knew Gale, and Gale was running for congressman, and they had some real way out lunatics that lived out there in the Saugus area, and such as that one woman I was telling you about with the laser gun, and but that would be Lazier, Lazier gun, but that would be the only one that I know of. Sheriff of what county is that? L.A. County. He has an automobile accident. He had an automobile accident, got a medical retirement from the sheriff's department. Is there anybody in Miami that you associate with the NSRP? I didn't know anybody in Miami that was in NSRP. Somebody mentioned to me, if I remember the name of Miltier, and I might have met with him. If I had met with him, it would have been at the bookstore that Patrick hung around in. The bookstore in Miami? Yes. What bookstore was that? It was a right-wing bookstore. Yeah, it was a right-wing bookstore. Did it have one of those names like a Patrick Henry bookstore or something like that? Yeah, in fact, I think that was the name of it. What about Dallas? Did you know any NSRP members in Dallas, or who might be? No, of course, Dallas is a different breed of cat altogether. It's like at that meeting at Logue's house when the old boy jumped up and said, rather than give $2,000 for this thing here, I'd rather donate $50,000 pot and have Kennedy killed. And you can say that, there's a possibility he might be in this. When was that said? That would have been, I think it was either have to have been about June, at the June meeting I had there on my way back to California, or in October. When I was going back down to Miami from California. I don't remember what time it was. You don't remember who said it? Yeah, I can tell you all about him. It was him and his business partner had just bought another. We were in Logue's office, and there were 5 other people in there besides myself. There was Logue, myself, the 2 men that had the trucking company, and a man, I think, that was with Texas Optical, or Texas Instrument. I'm positive that it was one or the other. Probably Texas Instrument. Anyway, the 2 men that were there that owned the trucking company, they had just purchased another trucking company for, I think it was $2.5 million, and this made them the largest truck line owner in either Texas or the United States. I forget which one it was, but they had just bought another trucking company. I think it was some big company that they just bought, and we were talking about putting $2,000 a piece into a pot and getting up to a $20,000 pot, buying a boat, going over to Cuba, pull our raids inside Cuba, comes back with boats, and we could steal from Cuba, start our own fishing fleet. So we could be self-sufficient and still pull our raids from these motherships. And he said, bullshit, rather than do this, I'd rather just donate $50,000 pot and get Kennedy killed. Are you interested? I said, look, friend, I'll go this Breaking and Neutrality Act, but forget this. And then Logue jumps up and he says, you'll not talk like that in this office because we don't know if the room is bugged or something like that. And then another one jumps up and says, I think it was this guy's partner, and he says, shit, then all we'd have is Johnson. Then the original guy who made the offer says, yeah, but at least he'll take care of us Texans. But this is where it dropped right there. Were you at the LA meeting? Did they know you were shortly to leave for Dallas? Wheat knew everything about it. He knew when I was leaving in the whole bit. Did they know Billy Seymour, any of them? No, I'm positive they had never met Seymour. I'm wondering about the way your name was later thrown in with Howard. They knew Howard? They know Howard. They knew you were going to leave with Howard for Miami by way of Dallas, right? Right. But you feel that they did not know Billy Seymour. No, I'm just positive they didn't know Billy Seymour. It would take Patrick to know Billy Seymour. Right. What about General Walker? You said you knew him. I met him once. Reynolds from positive, that's who it was. The one who got hit in the head, shot in the head or whatever. No, hold on a second. This is interesting. And then, so here he says, how about General Walker? Garrison asked him, how about General Walker? You said you knew him. He says, I met him once. Reynolds from, I'm positive that's who it was. That's the one that got hit in the head, shot in the head or whatever it was. Warren Reynolds. I think that's who it was. I was in Dallas, Texas, and Patrick and myself was there. And first place we went the day after we got there was Morris. He's also an attorney, and he's in the Adolfo building. All right, so we're going to end up pausing here for the day and picking it up tomorrow, but I need to point out a couple things, okay? So we already know that it was Loran Hall and Jerry Hemming who met with General Walker in March of 1963, but here you have Loran Hall lying and saying that he was introduced by Reynolds. So he might have been introduced by Reynolds, but the name Warren Reynolds, where does the name Warren Reynolds pop up again? Warren Reynolds pops up as one of the alleged witnesses in the Tippit shooting. Interesting, huh? Warren Reynolds, whenever your shit pops up multiple times in the assassination story from different angles, you gotta raise a close eye on this person. So, but that's going to be it for today. We're going to pick this up tomorrow. Continuing with Jim Garrison's interview of the long-lost interview of Loran Hall. Thanks, everybody.